Hi, I'm Emma.
And I'm Helena, and we both work at the MS Trust. Just a little disclaimer, we're recording this over Zoom, so apologies if the sound is iffy at any stage. Please do bear with us.
We'd like to welcome you to our podcast, Multiple Sclerosis, Breaking It Down, and to this episode about research and taking part in clinical trials when you have MS.
MS is a very active area of research, and new treatments are coming through and established ones are being improved. This gives a lot of hope for the future, but the development of new MS treatments is very long and it's a difficult process that we will learn a bit more about in today's episode.
Just before we start, for those of you who don't know so much about the MS Trust, we'll just give you a little bit of an introduction. So myself and Helena work here at the MS Trust, which is a UK charity for people affected by multiple sclerosis. The MS Trust is here for everyone affected by MS. So that can be people who have been diagnosed themselves or family or friends or anyone else who wants to find out a little bit more about the condition. And we're here from the moment of diagnosis and throughout your journey. So that includes today, tomorrow, and every day afterwards. And we make sure that a life with MS isn't a life defined by MS. We provide trusted information to help people with MS live their best life possible. And we also train and educate MS health professionals to offer the best care. One of the other things we also do is we fund MS specialist nurses in the areas of greatest need across the UK.
And now back to the world of research. Back in 2018, I believe it was, I took part in a clinical trial that was dubbed the CCMR1 trial at Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge. I had been interested in reading about research for a long while, but I never really thought about taking part because, well, one, I was never really qualified to take part, and two, it's never really been any trials that were close to me. But one day we were actually asked by the Cambridge team to put up an advert in our Facebook, MS Trust Facebook group that we have about taking part in this trial. And the trial was to hope to see if a repurposed cancer drug called bexarotene could cause myelin to regrow, so which they then call remyelination. And I thought this area was amazingly interesting. So I did a while, but I decided to sign up. So I'll tell you a bit more about my experience during the rest of the podcast. And we'll also catch up with Faisal, who took part in the same trial as me.
Yeah, so before you tell us too much more about that one, Helena, should we have a listen to your interview with Dr. Nick Cunniffe? And he's going to tell us all about the ins and outs of clinical trials and some of the things that he's currently working on.
So today we're here to talk about clinical trials, and with me is Dr. Nick Cunniffe, who was a part of the clinical trial that I was involved in myself. Thank you for taking part, Nick.
And, Thank you for having me.
And I think, let's start with, what is a clinical trial?
Yeah, so what is a clinical trial? I mean, I guess the starting point is to say that a clinical trial is essentially an experiment that allows doctors to determine whether treatments are beneficial to people living with an illness. Now, you may hear about different phases of clinical trials. Well, these largely reflect the size of the trial, but also the scope of the question that's being asked. For instance, there's phase 1 studies, and they're the smallest, and largely a mechanism to determine the safety of any potential treatments, alongside any dose considerations as well. Then there are phase 2 studies that are slightly larger, and these are generally to see if drugs are effective, as well as starting to examine their side effects. And then finally, we have perhaps the most important studies, which are the phase 3 studies, which are much larger, generally involving hundreds, sometimes even thousands of people. And these aim to robustly test whether a drug is safe and effective. And of course, on the fringe of that, you do have phase 4 studies, phase 4 trials as well, but they're generally focused on research that's done once a drug is already in use.
Taking back to talking about how the clinical trial actually work. So when people want to sign up for them, what should they expect? What's in a trial?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different ways of designing and structuring a clinical trial. I mean, the most common and the best way of determining whether a drug is effective is in what's known as a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial. So I think what people should expect in such a study is to be randomly assigned to either receiving an active treatment or even to receive a matched placebo or dummy drug. And the element in the title of being double-blinded means that neither the participant nor the study team actually know what the participant is taking. So I think that's really important, because that allows you to have two, or sometimes more in bigger studies, matched groups, so we can precisely quantify the effects of a potential treatment.
That makes sense. One question that we see popping up quite a lot of the time here at the MS Trust is, why does it take so long for MS drugs to get to the market from the sort of research stage to the actual getting them?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think the answer speaks to the point I made in the first question. I mean, it's really important to demonstrate that the medicines are both safe and effective before they can be rolled out to everyone living with a particular illness. And that really does mean going through the various different processes, the different stages that I just outlined. I mean, it has to be said that it's an unfortunate reality that lots of drugs that show promise in preclinical studies are not effective when it comes to clinical trials. So it's really important to go through each of those different steps just to make sure that the right treatments are brought forward into widespread use. A particularly appealing approach that's received more attention recently is to try and speed up drug development, is actually to try and repurpose treatments that are already licensed for other indications, because that can bypass some of the earliest stages. But in reality, there's a time lag of many years before a drug is proven to be both safe and effective and allow it to be brought forward into clinical practice.
Mm. And I guess with people sort of pointing out with the COVID vaccines going so fast, that was because there were so many people working on it, and all other trials had stopped more or less during that time, didn't they?
True. Yeah. Yeah. I'm included.
So what trials are you working on at the moment?
Yeah. So I work in the Cambridge Centre for Myelin Repair, and you mentioned your trial before. That was CCMR1, Cambridge Centre for Myelin Repair Trial 1. So I'm now working on the CCMR2 trial. So in this trial, we're testing the combination of two drugs that, as I mentioned before, are already licensed for other diseases. So we're testing metformin, which is already in widespread use for diabetes, alongside clemastine, which is an antihistamine, which can be used in hay fever. And we know that the combination of these two drugs can significantly enhance the repair process, or remyelination, when they're used in animals. And because we know they're safe in other illnesses, we can bypass that phase 1 step and go straight to a phase 2 trial. And that's what CCMR2 is. It's a phase 2 trial. And just like I mentioned before, it's an example of a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial. And just to review what that means, it means that half the participants on this trial are going to receive the active drugs, so the combination of metformin and clemastine, and half will receive matched placebos. And they're allocated at random, so neither participant nor we as the study team know who's taking what. In CCMR2, we're testing the drugs in two key ways, with a test of nerve function, which is an eye test using what's called visual evoked potentials, and that allows us to measure repair of the visual pathway, which, as we know, is frequently involved in the course of MS. Mm. And second, we use a test of nerve structure with specialized MRI brain scans that allow us to measure remyelination within MS lesions.
That sounds exciting. So how far along are you in this? Are you recruiting, or are you just starting?
We are just starting. We're 2 months in. We're aiming for 50 participants. We have 6 so far. So yeah, definitely recruiting. It might be that some people listening are interested in taking part. I think the first thing to stress is that it's a single centre study based in Cambridge, and we're aiming to recruit people that are fairly local to us, so within a couple of hours of Cambridge, really, just because of the number of visits that are required. Mm-hmm. But just to summarize a few other selection criteria, just in case that people are interested, to take part in this particular trial, you'd need to have relapsing remitting MS, be aged between 25 and 50 years, and be stable on a disease-modifying treatment. I mean, there's a really good scientific reason for this, because we want to make sure that the inflammation of MS is well controlled, and we do that with the DMTs that we take, and that's really so that we can study the repair process happening in some degree of isolation.
That sounds exciting. So you were mentioning the specific criteria for this trial, but in general for trials, what should people think about before they sign up?
Yeah, I mean, I think the starting point is to say that I think clinical trials are really great, because it's a cooperation between patients and doctors, both trying to find effective treatments together. And one of the real benefits to clinical trials is that for some participants, it means having access to treatments that are not otherwise available to them. But being a participant on a trial is not a trivial matter. There's a possibility of side effects with any experimental drug. There's also the burden of on people's time, because, I mean, for instance, using my trial as an example, CCMR2, it's going to involve 7 visits to the hospital over a period of 7 months. And after all this investment of your time, you might be assigned to a control group and not actually receive the treatment being studied. So I think the key thing to say is that if you're thinking about signing up for a trial, it's really important to read through all of the information about the trial, take an opportunity to speak to the trial team, and really make sure that you've had a chance to ask any questions you have before signing up.
You mentioned about the sort of getting into Cambridge and travel and things like that. Do people get paid for taking part in trials?
I mean, it varies on the particular trial. In some trials, people are paid for their time, for their participation. In others, people are paid for their travel expenses. So you mentioned getting into Cambridge. So for my study, we're paying reasonable travel expenses and parking for our participants, but there's no formal payment for actual participation. It's just the travel expenses. But it varies from one trial to the next, and that's a really good question that would be one to put to the study team if there was one in particular that someone was thinking about participating in.
And how do people actually find out about what clinical trials are going on at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, there are various sources of information. I mean, the most user-friendly sources of information, and probably the most the most comprehensive lists that I've seen are actually on the MS charity website. So both the MS Society and the MS Trust have really good information on this. I mean, there are larger, shall I say, repositories of clinical trials out there. So one example is a website called clinicaltrials.gov, and that's a repository of trials used by both academic and pharmaceutical companies. But it really can be quite a long list and quite daunting to go to. So I think actually the charity websites are, generally speaking, it's a good starting point.
If somebody with MS have looked at this list, of trials that's going on, and they want to take part, how should they go about doing it?
I mean, I think if someone living with MS wanted to learn more about participating in a particular trial, I think it's worth reaching out to that trial team and speaking with them directly. But alternatively, I think there's also your usual MS neurologist is a good person to speak to, because they'll often be able to refer anyone to trials that they might potentially be eligible for, and also know what trials are happening or coming up in the local area. So definitely speaking to your usual neurologist is a way forward.
Excellent. So, and then just looking to the future, I guess, what trials would you like to see happen in the future? Yeah,
I think for the last 30 years or so, the research community has been so focused on drugs to stop inflammation in the brain. I mean, now that they've largely achieve this, we need to repair the damage that inflammation does. And I think the main way to do this is to encourage the brain stem cells that we all have to repair myelin. And so I'm particularly excited about remyelinating treatments being taken forwards. We've now seen 3 phase 2 trials show a positive result of sorts in clinical trials. So it's not long before remyelinating therapies reach phase 3 trials, and therefore we can robustly say whether or not they're going to have an effect on people with MS. We think they will. It's just a matter of time before we can demonstrate that in a trial. So I think kind of what excites me, I think armed with a combination of DMTs, a remyelinating treatment that I hope to see very soon, perhaps a neuroprotective treatment as well. We're armed with that combination, we'll be much closer to realizing our ambition, which is largely to for people with MS to be only minimally affected by the illness.
So there's definitely lots of exciting things going on then. That's brilliant. Thank you so much for chatting with me today. And we'll pop in the episode, the show notes for links for your trial as well, if you have a link to it.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And people can hopefully get in touch then. Right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now, if this was a commercial podcast, here's where there would be an advert. But as we're a charity, we don't do that. So instead, we'd like to take the opportunity to tell you all about our fantastic resources for people with MS.
Our website, which is mstrust.org.uk, has tons of information and resources for people affected by MS in the UK. And of course, we also have a section about taking part in clinical research. We also have some articles about the latest drugs in development, and you can read all of our research updates, where our colleague Janice currently does a deep dive into the interesting topics currently happening in the world of MS.
And now over to talking about what it's like to take part in a clinical trial if you have MS. So I'm here today with Faisal, who we're going to talk to about being a part of clinical trials. But let's start at the beginning, shall we? Do you want to just tell me a little bit about yourself and how you were diagnosed with MS?
Sure. So I'm Faisal. I'm 45 now, and I was diagnosed in 2013, actually. But the first incident I had that gave any indication I had MS was shortly after the birth of my first son in late 2007. It was kind of a stressful time, as you can imagine. Wasn't getting much sleep, very busy at work, kind of draining and so on. On New Year's Eve 2007, I started to notice that I couldn't read a newspaper clearly anymore. And I thought it was just tiredness, and I thought I would blink it away and sleep. Anyway, the following day, I thought, no, actually, when I close one eye, I can tell there's something wrong. And it was really hard to describe it. A kind of fuzziness or a red film or something. Spoke to the GP, and the GP rushed me into hospital and said, oh, it could be some kind of problem with the retina or something. And they couldn't figure out what it was. They couldn't see anything. And they sent me to a specialist unit. And there, right at the very end, from my description, not from anything they could see, they said, we think it's optic neuritis. And my wife and I had never heard of this before. And they were very gentle, actually, in kind of making the connection with MS. They explained how it would just go away by itself or recover by itself. There was not much you could do. Get rest and just wait. And they then mentioned the link to MS and said, do you want to go for a test? And we discussed it and said no, on the understanding that there was no benefit really at that point in getting a diagnosis. I had a couple of relapses, twice more of optic neuritis. And I think after that, we went to see specialists and had a formal diagnosis made. Luckily, I've recovered fairly well from all 3 incidents. So around 2013, I was diagnosed.
And how are you sort of on to day-to-day symptoms now? Have the optic neuritis come back, or are you okay?
I'm okay. And since around 2015, I've been on medication. and it's always hard to tell, but I think it's probably helped.
Yeah.
So my day-to-day experience, I'm aware I'm incredibly blessed. Apart from some limited limit to my eyesight, my left eye, generally speaking, don't really have many other symptoms at all. So I think there's kind of lasting damage to the optic nerve.
Yeah.
That kind of gradually gets worse, but otherwise in good shape, I think.
Good. So let's talk about clinical trials. We were actually on the same clinical trial. So it's always interesting to hear what other people have to say about their experience beforehand. So when did you hear about the trial? And did you have a sort of an interest in MS research before then?
I heard about the trial through my consultant at the hospital in Queen Square in London. I have to describe it. I had a general interest in MS research beforehand, which largely consisted of occasionally Googling stuff, getting terrified, and then clicking off and never looking at it again. That was my general approach to MS research. And as for the trial, I was very nervous and anxious about participating in it, very concerned about the downsides, and spent quite a lot of time understanding what was involved, several visits to speak to the team, and so on. So beforehand, I didn't really have much experience.
So obviously you said some of the initial feelings were quite worried. Were there any other sort of, did you, because I remember reading about it and I was very much like, ooh, this is interesting, but also scary. And it was very sort of up and down. Did you talk to anybody about your sort of feelings? Because I had a colleague opposite me and I went, you need to, what should I do? Because I just wanted to bounce the idea off someone.
Yeah. So I spoke to my wife, I spoke to family members and close friends about it who knew about my diagnosis. And you're right, actually, there was one element of that trial which really stuck out, which was repairing myelin, you know, the kind of sheath covering the nerves, and knowing that was damaged in my optic nerve, obviously, suddenly it's very appealing to think, if I run the drug and if it works, maybe there'll be some recovery in this. So there was that upside.
Yeah.
But generally, I was just a bit, I was just apprehensive, and people gave balanced views. They said, it's obviously they knew that I was willing to participate in order to further research.
Yeah.
That was my big motivation. And the other thing that my consultant assured me of was, the team, which was at Addenbrooke's in Cambridge, is one of the best teams. They'll really look after you. It will be like having two lots of consultants and their teams for a while.
Yeah.
So that gave me enough reassurance. And then when I met the team, they were uniformly warm, compassionate, no pressure whatsoever.
Yeah.
I never once felt any pressure from anybody to participate, which helped.
So when you looked at the sort of the paperwork that was given, and you obviously, there were some scary things on there, but what were your sort of initial worries, first and foremost, when you read it?
The initial worries were, around the side effects list, was quite terrifying. And looking back, it's actually amazing that I signed up. I think and lots of people signed up.
Yeah.
Especially knowing now that many of those side effects happened.
Yeah.
But what was helpful is there was no attempt to hide the side effects, obviously. And I know that's part of the course in trials, but it's something that I guess you worry about being a layperson. And secondly, they were tackled head on.
Yeah.
So in each case, it was explained, this is what the side effect is, this is how it affects you, and this is the action we take when it's identified. And that really helped me to overcome those initial worries.
Yeah. So how did you feel after the first meeting there? Because obviously we spoke to them, well, I don't know if yours was exactly the same as mine, but I spoke on the phone first, but then you sort of came in and met in person. Obviously you said already that you thought they were very warm and very sort of nice with the way they spoke to you, but what did you sort of feel coming out of that meeting?
I was quite excited. So we were actually on a camping holiday not too far from Addenbrooke's, a place called Houghton Mills in Cambridgeshire. So I broke off my holiday briefly and drove to Addenbrooke's for it. And it was a beautiful sunny day. I think that helped.
Yeah.
You know, I went in. The facility is incredible, and yeah, that was kind of the first proper meeting I had with everybody, or at least a few of the relevant people there.
Yeah.
And I actually came out feeling quite excited.
Yeah.
I have to say. So I'd gone from apprehension and nerves and anxiety to feeling quite excited and looking at the positives of participation.
Yeah, I remember feeling really almost like a bit gobsmacked, because I came in with the same thoughts as you. You know, you'd read that long list of all the side effects and almost like risk of death and all these things, and you feel like, and then I sat down opposite the consultant and sort of said, oh, well, this, and what do people who are on the trial feel? Because they'd already sort of started it a little bit. And I said, what are they main issues? And he sort of looked at me and went, the size of the pills. I thought, what? Because that was something, I have to say, I'd never even once contemplated that they were going to be anything, but obviously they were rather large, weren't they?
Yeah. And lots of them.
Lots and lots of them. Yeah, seven was it?
It was 7 to begin with. Yeah, I think I lasted 2.5 weeks on 7.
Yeah.
Before they noticed my I think it was my neutrophil levels were dropping, my thyroid function was going, and then they scaled back.
Oh, right. Yeah. So talk me through, we'll go step back a little bit and got excited talking about the crazy medication. Talk me through sort of how it happened after your first appointment, when you had more or less said, okay, I'm signing up, I'm doing this.
Yeah. Oh, so one thing they were very good at is explaining clearly what commitment was involved in the trial.
Yeah.
I forget now what it was. I think it was weekly visits for 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And then moved to either fortnightly or monthly, I think.
Yeah.
For another 6 or 12 months, something like that.
Yeah.
They explained what would be happening at each visit. And so some things were repeated, you know, blood tests, a kind of very standard tests to do with mobility, and, you know, a conversation about any side effects and symptoms and so on. Some visits, though, were for, you know, doing a baseline MRI scan.
Yeah.
And that took quite a long time. And that was repeated, I forget now, but I think it was after 3 months, and then it's after 12 months, something like that. So those were that was the kind of time commitment that was explained. And so then I guess I quickly got into the habit. I picked, you know, the day was agreed, and, you know, I started to actually enjoy.
Yeah.
You know, I'd drive up the M11. We have an electric car, so I was guaranteed to need to stop on the way back to charge it, which meant I could get a coffee.
Nice.
And like you know, and then drive home again.
Yeah.
So that was the kind of routine.
Yeah, I think that it was on Tuesdays. They sort of, you would come in and it was just part of, I used to do a little bit of work sitting outside in one of the cafes there, because another thing that did sort of happen was that there was a long waiting time for the drugs from the pharmacy. So I used to use that excuse to get lots of coffee and do some work in the sunshine in the garden there. And it did become a routine. I think there was also an EDS. They used to do those sort of EDSS checks, didn't they?
That's what it's called. Yeah.
And there was some invoked potentials, the one where you get the electrodes on your head and the things that are flickering. It was quite interesting, sort of going for those tests just to see if there were any differences from week to week. And they were very friendly, the team, I found. It was you felt like you were part of the team after a while. You sort of knew everyone there.
Yeah. I definitely felt that. And where that really struck home for me is unrelated to the trial. I had a real problem with build-up of wax in one of my ears, and it was impacting the eardrum. It was causing a lot of pain. And my GP had been unable to resolve it, because when they'd attempted to use syringing to clear it, it made the pain worse. We had to stop.
Yeah.
And I just mentioned this in passing to Nick, one of the team, and he just said, "Right, wait here," and he dashed off. And from somewhere he sourced an otoscope, and the next thing I know, he's looking in my ear. And he said, yep, no, it's deeply impacted. And he said, look, as it happens, my wife's an ENT specialist. You need microsuction. I'd never heard of it.
Yeah.
My ignorance, but I'd never heard of this. The following day, I managed to get an appointment and had it sorted. And the relief, I can't tell you, was amazing. Now, I know this has nothing to do with MS and nothing to do with the drug. It's just an indication of what you just said. Feeling part of the team, feeling looked after. And they really cared about us, I thought, in the round.
I know they really did. I think at one point I came in and I had pain in my sinuses, and they sort of went, oh, well, I think it's a sinus infection. And then they prescribed me with some antibiotics while I was there. So it felt like you sort of almost sidetracked the GP a little bit there. But it was, you really did feel like you were really properly looked after. It was quite strange, really. So how often, we spoke a bit about the appointments. So, I mean, it was going for, remind me now, was it for 6 months altogether?
I think it was 6 months. Yeah. It's funny, I've forgotten now. But yeah, roughly 6 months. And then we had to go back at 12 months for another scan.
For more checkups.
Yeah.
So sort of looking back at it now, because it's a few years ago now, what do you feel about, what's your sort of feelings about taking part?
I'm really glad I took part. I'm also glad, in a perverse way, that I had the side effects I did.
Yeah.
So I think I touched them earlier in answer to one of the other questions. So certain key levels which they monitor, fell dramatically, but they expected this would be a side effect. So one thing about that, obviously, you immediately know that you're on the drug.
Yeah.
Not on the placebo, which is an interesting thing mentally, I think, to acknowledge and deal with. So I'm glad those side effects happened, because it meant I had a kind of thorough trial experience. Got to see them dealing with that. I was on levothyroxine for a while, which kind of replaces your thyroid hormone. So at one point I'm taking my normal MS pills, vitamin D, my trial pills, the thyroid pills. I was just like kind of guzzling these
so many, as well as the 7 huge pills. I do remember that sitting in the waiting room when people sort of came in and out, because you started to recognize some of these people. And spoiler alert, was on the placebo. So I only came out with my, prescribed pills that I was going to take, and these other people would come out with a huge big bag of, like, I don't know, I was going to say goodies, not exactly goodies, but it was just like, oh crikey. So you could quite quickly guess who was actually on the real medication and who was on the placebo.
But about the experience, you asked about looking back at the experience. Essentially it got as bad as it could be for me.
Yeah.
Not just what they were measuring, but I had some skin flaking problems and other things that happened, which were related to what was going on as a result of the side effects.
Yeah.
But it got pretty much as bad as it could be, short of, some of the really nasty, I think there was pancreatitis or something, some other very, very rare possibilities. But other than that, and I got through it. And I got through it with amazing amount of support, amazing amount of help, not just in the visits, but during the week. I'd phone up sometimes to say, listen, this has happened, or I'm feeling this.
Yeah.
I think once midweek they advised me to reduce my dose.
Yeah.
So that support wasn't just there when we turned up. It was actually there all the time whenever you needed it.
So you're saying about the side effects, and some of it, I guess, gather from what other people were having, was the side effects mostly showed up in the readings rather than sort of how people were feeling. But how were you actually feeling? Because obviously you said about skin itching and things like that. How was your just general health during the time?
Generally fine in terms of how I felt. The thyroid function issue showed up, I think, in occasional bouts of kind of sudden fatigue and slumps and so on. The issue with that is, I think most MS patients will experience that anyway.
Yeah,
I imagine. So it was difficult to distinguish between whether that was happening for one reason or another.
Yeah.
I was more aware of it, and this is, I suppose, something to talk about in terms of the downsides of being in a trial. Is certainly for me, I'm not very good at focusing on my MS too much.
Yeah.
My one of my ways of coping is actually not having it in my mind all the time. The trial obviously brings that to the fore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I found that a challenge psychologically to overcome the fact that I was constantly thinking about it. And then the minute you have a little tingle in your fingers or something, straight away you're thinking about the disease, about progression, and catastrophizing, if you're like me. Yeah. And having to walk back from that.
Yeah. I feel, obviously I was on the placebo, but in the beginning stages there, and it was a very warm summer as well. So I do remember feeling very tired anyway, and doing the train, because I was doing the train journeys. And I just remember thinking, oh gosh, I wonder, is this, just my MS being funny, or am I on the drug, or is it just because of the heat? And you become so hyper aware of things that you just normally would kind of try to ignore as much as you can. And it is I think that was a tricky one, because especially if you don't want to think about it, or that's the way you deal with it, and suddenly it's just there in front of you, like, hello, this is something that's not right at the moment. So obviously when we found out the results of the trial, that sort of happened during lockdown, so we were all in a Zoom meeting, weren't we? What did you gather about? So we will talk about this later when we talk to people from Cambridge in the podcast as well, about the results of the trial. But I guess, spoiler alert, it sort of came out that actually bexarotene, the drug that was taken, it did work for remyelination, but it was such a horrible drug with all the side effects that it couldn't be used for and what did you think?
I thought it was a fair outcome. It wasn't an unexpected outcome, because I think it wasn't. The side effects were not tolerable, except in those trial conditions, with all that support and all that help, immediately helicoptered in, as it were. Imagining that kind of process going out to ordinary people in their ordinary lives with ordinary health services definitely wouldn't work. It was very exciting that it did have an effect. And for a little while after that, I was closing one eye and looking, to see, is there any clarity? But obviously the effect was very small. I think that was the other thing they said, was it was quite a small effect, even if scientifically significant. Statistically significant.
Because they did ask people, sort of, obviously we decided that this drug would not be used for it. Is there anyone who would want to continue take, not as an offer, but they were just asking it as a question. And I think everybody just said no.
That's right. No. So, it's not like, and I think the fact that the correct dosage was 7 pills. And by the end, I don't think anyone was on 7. No. I think within a couple of weeks, everyone was cut down to 2 or 3, because it was just very toxic. Again, that said, this isn't going to work.
So once you stopped taking the tablets, how quickly sort of did you bounce back, or did you bounce back completely?
So the kind of skin flaking issue led to a couple of other dermatological challenges, which actually lasted about 1.5 years.
Oh, wow.
But not in a way that impacted my life. It was just something I had to deal with through the GP. In terms of the stuff they measure, I forget, but I think within a few weeks, things were kind of back to close to normal. And then I think by 3 months, there was no sign in any of my readings. One of the scary readings actually was cholesterol levels. Lipid readings. And I remember my regular GP was out, so I was seen by somebody else, and they saw the results of my blood tests. They called me in straight away and said, "We need to talk about your heart." And I was explaining, look, it's fine. I think my heart's fine. This is because of the trial. But it was these readings are very worrying. We need to discuss it. And it took a lot of explaining to get him to relax a bit and say, look, they know it's elevated during the trial because of a side effect, and it comes down once you're off the drug. And that's what happened. So after I was off the drug, within a few months, certainly I was back down to normal levels.
Oh, that's good.
Which was reassuring, obviously, because
because I have heard other people sort of saying that they struggle with fatigue for a while after it as well. But I guess it depends on the person, if they're somebody who's struggled with fatigue normally as well. So do you think the trial lived up to your expectations?
I think more than lived up to my expectations. I think it broke through a real barrier for me. I would definitely be willing to participate again. On a case-by-case basis, of course. All the reading, but now I just feel so much more knowledgeable about what I'm looking for when I'm reading through something in a trial. What's alarming to me, what isn't. The time commitment, what it actually involves. So having been through it once, I think really, really helped. I might have felt differently if I was on the placebo. I don't know how you felt.
Well, I still felt like I was sort of doing my bit for science. I feel like there was one part of me that was a little bit disappointed, but I think it's still feel like you need the sort of the placebo people as well in order to do it. And I just felt like the whole experience of going there, and because they were constantly updating of what was going on as well. I never felt like, because I was blogging about this, and I always said I never felt like I was a lab rat. It was almost like you were there in a, well, obviously not a doctor myself, but but it still felt like you were part of that team that was like, it's we that are doing this, not that you were just somebody they experimented on a bit. I feel the same. I would sign up for it, and that was my last question really. If you would do it, would you want to sign up again? But instead then, since you already responded to that, what would you say to somebody who's thinking of signing up for clinical trials? Because I feel like the questions and issues that I had at the start was very much different from things that I thought of at the end of it. So it feels like if I could go back in time and talk to myself, I would be like, well, these are the things that you need to worry more about than perhaps this list of potential death. Very scary.
I would say probe the team on what are the most common, if you're on the drug, what are the most common expected side effects, and how are we doing with that? And I would actually not worry too much about, there's a 1 in 1 million chance that somebody could fall down and die from participation in this. Mostly because it's just not helpful to anyone to kind of dwell on that, other than acknowledging it's there. So I'd focus on the most likely side effects and really think about those. And if you find you're hesitating over those, then maybe that's something to think about. The logistics. I mean, we both said how we kind of came to enjoy in different ways our trips to the hospital. But it's a commitment. Something great about the team that ran this trial is they reminded us occasionally, I don't know if they said the same to you, but they said, look, at any point during the trial, you are free to withdraw. Obviously I felt quite strongly that I shouldn't easily withdraw. But if you do commit, it's quite often quite a commitment. And if you're getting your blood drawn every 3 months or 6 months as an MS patient elsewhere, and having a consultation every 6 months or 12 months elsewhere, you're now going to have your blood drawn a lot more often. A lot more prodding and poking. A lot more walking in a straight line, standing on one leg, etc. So all of this stuff is going to be a lot more present in your life for a few months or however long you're on the trial.
Did you find Sorry, I was just wondering, did you feel a little bit weird afterwards when there wasn't somebody constantly testing you? Because I almost, in some strange way, missed it, because it was like you had your little MOT, so you know that the things were doing all right. And then suddenly, like with the MRI scans, for instance, that was quite interesting to know what was happening. And now there's sort of not been anything like that apart from your annual checkup with the nurse.
I think that's all part of something we talked about at the start of this conversation, which is how you feel looked after by a team of experts and a team of warm human beings.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's just coincidence, and maybe other trial teams are, horrible people.
And we were lucky.
Yeah, maybe we were just lucky. But, I genuinely enjoyed, seeing Karen again, seeing the phlebotomist. We'd always have a big chat, and Karen would say, "Look, can you guys stop talking? We've got other people have their blood taken." Really enjoyed that side of it. So yes, I definitely missed both the kind of interactions, but also the feeling that you had this crack team on you the whole time was great. And I did miss that. On the other hand, I don't know, who looks after you on an ongoing basis, but the team that in Queen Square that looks after me, they're really great. Obviously, they've got real life to deal with, so they can't be talking to me every week. But you definitely miss having an amazing team around you the whole time.
Yeah, I'm with Adam Brooks normally, but obviously the research team is quite different from the sort of normal team. And they are really good, but they're very, very, very busy, so you don't have the same sort of attention on you that you did at that thing. So it's a strange thing, but I think the time commitment and sort of really think about the things that worries you, and that the family around you can support you as well, because I guess because sometimes things take much longer as well. I guess that's the thing, because even if they say this should normally take this, but we had that strange thing where the pharmacy would take very long time to dispose of these pills, and I think that was something that they were trying to sort out, but it's still, I don't know about you, but I think I waited for 2 hours to get pills at one point, and it's so you couldn't be rushing back to wherever you're from to get to work. Exactly. So
that's a very good point, and maybe a point I've overlooked, because I've got some flexibility in my work and childcare arrangements. Yeah. So actually, if it took an extra 2 hours at the pharmacy, it wasn't a big deal. Yeah. But that won't be the case for everybody. No. So you need that support from employers and family members. You're quite right.
Yeah. And I obviously, working for the MS Trust, I was lucky in that way, because they were kind of interested in the trial anyway. So it was I was blogging about it, so I could sort of spend my time there freely. But it's not everybody that's can sort of have those situations. Right. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me. It's been very interesting. And do let us know if you do sign up for any more trials, and we can chat about that in the future, maybe.
Definitely. I'm looking at one. I may have mentioned to you. I'm looking at participating in one, but I'll we'll cover that another time.
Yeah, no, that absolutely. It's always very interesting to hear about trials. I mean, that's the other thing, I suppose, about trials, because it does give you some hope. It's good to know that things are being done and things are happening in the world of MS, and it's quite a lot of things that are going on at the moment, isn't there?
Definitely.
Right. Well, thank you so much, and we'll hopefully chat to you again in the future.
Yeah, I hope so. Thanks, Helena.
And we're back.
I think that this topic of research and taking part in research is really interesting. I don't know. I mean, obviously, you don't have MS, Emma, but would you take part in a clinical trial if you were offered, if you thought it was interesting?
Oh, I think that's a tricky question. I suppose, as you sort of touched upon earlier, Helena, I think it really depends exactly what the trial is looking at, and if it's something that you were happy to put your body through. But I think it would be a really interesting experience. And, if you felt like you were doing something for the greater good overall, it'd definitely be worth getting involved in.
Yeah, I think it was interesting because talking to Faisal about sort of why you wanted to sign up and things, and I think hearing other people's opinion as well, because I think when we did a webinar about research, which I think was very interesting to listen to as well, we'll put the link in the show notes. We spoke a little bit afterwards. I had a little catch up with Faisal, and we were saying that there's a lot of people wanting to take part in research because it's like there's no medication out there for them, or there's no treatments that's available. So taking part in a clinical trial when it's sort of maybe the only option that's viable, that's quite a different from our experiences of taking part in a clinical trial. Because I was very much like, I want to do my part for science, and this could be interesting. And if this is a treatment that goes through, that would be amazing. So, because I often get asked, were you disappointed because I was put on the placebo? And I never really felt maybe a little tiny part of me kind of thought, oh, well, that's a shame. But at the same time, I kind of felt like, well, my numbers and my contribution is still really important for the research itself. And if it would have been, if Bexarotene had been a treatment that would have gone through and people would have been offered it, then hopefully I would have been okay to go on the treatment afterwards, if you see what I mean. So I kind of thought the greater end there. But if it's more of a kind of trying to find some treatment to help you and there's nothing out there and research is the only way out, then obviously it's a different kind of approach to it. But I find research in MS, and it doesn't have to always be the clinical trials either, because we've had, people can just fill in forms or answer questionnaires from researchers, or there can be trials that isn't necessarily looking at medication. There was a trial a few years back, which I think we've mentioned before when we spoke about fatigue, where they were testing if cocoa would work on fatigue. So there is a lot of research out there that if medication sounds like a scary thing to go down, there's definitely other things out there. So I think it's all to be encouraged.
Yeah, that's a really valid point, actually. A lot of we get quite a few comments to the MS Trust asking, when a cure is going to come and things like that. And I think it's really important to remember that although there is a lot of research going on looking at what causes MS and potential cures and things, there is also a lot of other research that is helping people living with MS at this present moment. And some of those trials, as including some of the ones we mentioned, looking at things like that, and they're just as important.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, we did this webinar a few weeks ago, and one of the topic was then on research in MS, and we had Faisal in there, but also Professor Alistair Coles and Professor Klaus Schmierer, and they were talking all kinds of exciting trials. So yeah, like I said, look in the episode notes and you can watch the YouTube recording of that, because I found that very interesting. They answered a lot of questions on other trials that wasn't necessarily just their trials as well. So I think it sort of just gives good hope that things are happening and it's not standing still. And I think, just thinking how many different disease-modifying drugs have come onto the market since I was diagnosed 15 years ago. I mean, it does feel like it's a slow process when you start first hearing about it, but it has been quite fast-moving of things happening. And I think that's really, it's still frustrating that there isn't that much treatments out there for progressive MS, but there is some now that's coming through. And I think that's, that is a positive thing. There just needs to be more options and more things. So watch this space.
If you've got any questions about MS research, or perhaps have read something in the papers or online that you'd like to know more about, you can give our MS helpline a call. So they're available Monday to Friday, except from UK bank holidays, and that's from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Outside of these hours, you can leave us a message and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. So the number for our inquiry service is 0800 032 3839, or you can email us on ask@mstrust.org.uk. So that's available for anyone who wants to know more about MS, not just those currently living with the condition.
And you can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. And you can find this podcast on Spotify, Google, Apple Podcast, and Amazon Music. And get in touch. And like they say, like and subscribe. And tell other people about this podcast, please, because we'd like to reach more people. And get in touch and tell us what you thought of this podcast, and maybe tell us about what topics you'd like to hear in the future. And if you're new to MS, or if you're new to this podcast, then do check out other episodes of Multiple Sclerosis Breaking It Down. And then finally, a big thank you to Anne Chapman Audio for the music to the podcast. See you in 3 weeks' time. Bye.